So let's have a look at the analysis of this process. In the first process with the ute and the cafeteria, we've had to drive into the paddock. So this blue line demonstrates the entire motion of the vehicle and the person driving around the paddock. In addition, there's extra motion of the person getting in and out of the vehicle twice to open and close gates at the start here, and also some motion getting in and out of the vehicle to get to the cafeteria, and also some motion around those calves to ensure that they're feeding correctly. So that's process 1. In terms of the motion of process 2, there's no motion inside the paddock because we didn't enter the paddock at all, and there's a bit of motion here with the person getting in and out of the tractor, and again getting to the cafeteria, and some motion around the calves to ensure that they're feeding. So significantly less motion, as you can see, in process 2 than process 1. Let's have a look at the time breakdown of each of these processes. So with the ute process, this is the breakdown of all the activities that had to be done for that particular process. And the red times here are non-value-added sections of this process, or elements of this process, and the black times are value-added elements of this process. So if you look at the breakdown, there's a lot of red and a couple of black things. In total, that first process took 560 seconds. Now, this activity here called move calves and ensure feeding with 72 seconds, I've been quite generous here in saying that that's value added, but in fact this is a quality control activity. This is us checking that the calves are in fact feeding correctly, and the reason we're having to do that is because our process isn't designed 100% fail safe to ensure that automatically those calves are right on that feeder and feeding. So if we made some process redesign, for example, and ensured that there's extra teats on those feeders so that calves aren't having to run around searching for spare teats, as an example, then this process might improve and the time will reduce, and potentially we can remove that process. So in total 560 seconds, and in terms of value add and non-value add, this process is 87% non-value add and only 13% value add. Let's have a look at process 2 with the tractor. So in this process, again, this is the breakdown of all of these activities and the associated time element of these activities. Again, the reds are non-value added components of this task, and the black are value added components of the task. In total time for this activity, it's now 175 seconds. So you can see process 2 is significantly less time than process 1. In terms of value added and non-value added, this is now 73% value added, 27% non-value added, and there has been a time saving of 69%, and this is just for this one paddock, one group of calves. So you can imagine if you've got more than 400 calves, more than 10 paddocks, suddenly there's a considerable time saving in this example. Now, we can't just look at a process improvement in terms of time. We need to look at all of the other important elements of that process, such as safety, animal welfare, ease of doing it, cost, quality, and so forth. So there's other elements we need to consider before we know whether this process is the right process or not. So let's have a look at some of these other elements. In terms of animals, there's cow motion. So there was a lot more motion, 500 meters of calves running up and down the paddock chasing that cafeteria in process 1, 0 in process 2. Animal safety, there was a risk of running over and injuring stock in the process 1, which we've done unfortunately in the past. And process 2, there's none of that risk to animals. In terms of pasture, there's a potential to damage pasture by making mud racing through the paddock. Process 2, there's none of that risk. In terms of person, motion, there's about 500 meters of motion around the paddock in process 1, plus motion around the feeder. In process 2, there's just the motion around the feeder. People safety, in process 1, you're jumping in and out of cars at speed. There's a potential for injury and crashing, and also a stress increase. In process 2, we're having to cross that fence, so there's a potential for electric zap or a tripping hazard as well, which isn't ideal and needs to be addressed. In terms of time, process 1 is 560 seconds, process 2 175 seconds. In terms of vehicles, cost, there's a diesel usage / tax cost element of about 9.9 cents in process 1 for the 1 paddock, process 2 0. And in terms of vehicle, the process 1 requires a ute. You can't be racing around in a tractor like that, and that means it's limited to who can do the job, whereas in process 2 we've got a dedicated, low maintenance, easy to use tractor, and anyone can do the job. So you can see in terms of all of these requirements, in fact, process 2 is better than process 1 in terms of time and a lot of these other requirements. And if you imagine that you've got over 400 calves, as we do, more than 10 paddocks, you apply these savings over all of that time, and in fact this process 2 change has saved us 1.5 hours per day in this process alone. So you can imagine if we apply the same thinking to all the processes on our farm, suddenly how much time savings you can make, but not only time savings but also improvements in safety, animal welfare, cost, and all of those kind of things as well. Now, it's important to remember that this is an example from our farm only with our conditions, and it may not be relevant to your farm, but you can most certainly still use the same process of analysis to analyze any of your job tasks and identify potential waste and opportunities for improvement. Also in this example, there's still a lot of motion that we're doing around getting between these paddocks, and it's most certainly something that we're looking at also is to just eliminate all the unnecessary motion of driving between paddocks where all these calves are. So we're looking at moving all of the calves into a dedicated location, and that's our second future state improvement, and I'll do a separate video on that as well.